Is there something I can help you find? The service entrance is around the back. Darius Cole turned slowly. The woman standing 3 feet away had platinum blonde hair, pearls at her throat, a black gown that cost more than his rent, and a smile that had never once reached her eyes. "I'm not looking for the service entrance," Darius said. "Of course not." Celeste Hargrove glanced at his jacket, the worn canvas bag over his shoulder, the boots still carrying concrete dust from a site visit that had ended 4 hours ago. "Then perhaps you could tell me who authorized your access to this floor." "I'm a guest." Her smile didn't waver, it just thinned. "A guest? That's what I said." She turned slightly toward the 2 people standing just behind her board members. Both of them, both in expensive suits, both watching with careful neutrality. Celeste lowered her voice just enough to be heard by exactly the right number of people. "I'm going to ask someone from security to come and clarify your invitation." Darius didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't explain himself. He just stood there, still, like a man who had been in this exact moment before and had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you can do is let someone else's certainty become your emergency. 600 guests filled the ballroom behind them. Champagne, camera flashes, the low hum of money and ambition. The Walsh Properties annual gala, the kind of event that ended careers, or made them, depending on which side of the conversation you found yourself on. Celeste Hargrove had been on the making side for 22 years. She had no idea the man standing in front of her was about to change that. A voice cut through the tension before security arrived. "Celeste." One word, flat, quiet, but the kind of quiet that carries weight. Adrienne Walsh stood at the edge of the scene, emerald gown, hair pulled back. The expression on her face unreadable to most people in that room, but Celeste had known Adrienne Walsh for 11 years, and she recognized it immediately. It was not anger. It was something more controlled than anger, something more deliberate. Adrienne looked at Celeste for one long moment. Then she looked at Darius. Then she looked back at the 2 board members hovering uselessly in the background. She did not say, "This is my guest." She did not say, "You owe him an apology." She did not correct anything. What she did was take 2 steps forward, stand beside Darius Cole, and say to the room at large, in the measured tone of a woman who had built a $4 billion company entirely on her own terms, "I think the canapes are running low near the east windows. Celeste, you always notice these things before anyone else does." It was a dismissal dressed as a compliment. Celeste recognized it. The 2 board members recognized it. Even the approaching security guard seemed to sense that whatever had been about to happen had already been redirected. Redirected by someone with significantly more authority than everyone present. Celeste excused herself, walked toward the east windows. Her back was straight, her expression never changed. But her hands, just briefly, were not steady. The room breathed again. The chatter resumed. The cameras moved on to someone else. Darius stood very still beside Adrienne Walsh for a moment, neither of them speaking. She had no idea who this man really was. She had no idea what she had just stepped into. And when Celeste Hargrove found out all of it, every piece of it, what it would cost her, was everything she had spent 22 years building. But that is not where this story begins. This story begins 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday night, in the rain, with a broken suitcase latch and one small umbrella, and a hotel clerk who said 6 words that neither of them corrected in time. Take us back to that sidewalk, because what happened there changed 2 lives and ended one very powerful woman's carefully constructed world. Tuesday, 7:14 p.m. The rain came sideways that night, the kind that doesn't care about umbrellas. Darius Cole walked with his collar turned up and his canvas bag pulled close against his body. His boots were soaked through. His jacket, a good jacket, once 5 years ago had seen too many construction sites and too many winters to be anything but honest about what it was now. He looked like a man heading home after a long shift. That was not entirely wrong. He had spent 4 hours on a site in the garment district that afternoon, walking every floor of a 12-story residential building that was 2 weeks from completion, checking load points, reviewing the glazing on the south face, talking to the site foreman about a drainage issue on the third-floor terrace. What the foreman didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that Darius Cole had designed every inch of that building. From the foundation to the roofline, from the way natural light would enter the lobby at 9 a.m. in December, to the precise spacing of the structural columns that allowed the open floor plates on levels 7 through 10. He just never announced it. He never announced anything. That was the point. Here is what you needed to know about Darius Cole and what the world at large did not. He was 38 years old, black, originally from Atlanta, living in New York for the past 12 years. He had a daughter named Zoe. She was 9. She had her mother's laugh and his eye for the way buildings fit together. Already at 9, pointing out when a ceiling was the wrong height or a staircase had too many risers for its run. Her mother's name had been Marlene. Cancer. 4 years ago. September. Darius did not talk about that. Not to strangers. Not to most people he knew. He lived in a 3-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights. Modest building, clean. He had designed the renovation of the bathroom himself and done half the work by hand on weekends over 3 months. The kitchen had a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made the whole room feel larger than its square footage suggested. He knew exactly why that happened. He had planned it. He drove a 7-year-old Subaru. He had $38 in his wallet that night, and the next project payment was clearing on Friday. He was not worried about it. He had been in tighter spots. 8 years earlier, Darius Cole had been a principal at one of the most prestigious architecture firms in the country. His name had been on the door, not on the letterhead, not yet, but close. He had designed a building called the Meridian Center in Chicago, 44 stories, glass and Indiana limestone, a building that critics, when it opened, called one of the most significant commercial structures completed in the United States that decade. His name had not appeared on it. Not for 2 years. A senior white partner at the firm, a man named Gerald Ashworth, who had contributed nothing to the Meridian Center beyond a signature on the initial contract, had allowed his name to lead all press materials, all award submissions, all industry recognition. It was not an oversight. It was a pattern built into the structure of how that firm had always worked. Who got credited? Who stayed invisible? Who was considered the face of the work, and who was considered the labor behind it? Darius had sued. It took 14 months. He won. Then he walked away. Not because he couldn't fight. He had proven he could fight. Because he was tired of a room that only saw him clearly when a court ordered them to. He went independent, took only the projects that interested him, refused every opportunity for publicity that came his way. His name appeared in industry circles occasionally, briefly, without photographs, without quotes. Colleagues who had worked alongside him spoke of him in the specific, reverent tone people reserve for someone whose talent makes them slightly uncomfortable. He designed 7 buildings after the Meridian Center, 4 cities, 3 countries, 0 interviews. His philosophy was simple and absolute. The moment people know what I've built, they stop seeing who I am. They start seeing what they can use. He had explained this to exactly 2 people in his life. Kwame, his closest friend since college, and Marlene before she got sick. He had not explained it to anyone since. That Tuesday night, Darius was not supposed to be in Midtown at all. He had finished his site visit in the garment district and started walking north toward the subway when Zoe's school called the aftercare coordinator, checking on pickup timing. He had taken the call, turned 2 blocks east, and walked the wrong direction for 6 minutes before realizing it. He was rerouting when the rain got worse. He was 2 blocks from a hotel he had walked past 100 times without ever going inside when he heard the sound. A latch giving way, a suitcase hitting wet pavement, and a woman dropping to her knees on the sidewalk trying to gather silk blouses and a laptop case from a spreading puddle before the cameras parked 60 yards away could turn in her direction. He didn't think about it. He just knelt down beside her and started picking things up. 20 minutes earlier, Adrian Walsh had been in a room with 300 investors debating the future of luxury real estate in secondary markets. She had answered 41 questions in 6 hours. She had done so with the precise, confident cadence of a woman who had been doing this since she was 26 years old and had never once lost the thread of a conversation she didn't want to have. Walsh Properties. $4.2 billion in assets. 31 cities. 14,000 employees. Offices on 4 continents. Adrienne had built all of it herself. Starting with a single residential conversion in Brooklyn that she had financed with a second mortgage on a property she didn't fully own yet, and a contractor who had given her a sweetheart deal because he didn't think she'd actually go through with it. She had gone through with it. She had gone through with everything. The problem, and there was always a problem when you were Adrienne Walsh, was that the world had become more interested in who she was sleeping with than what she was building. For 3 years, she had been the subject of a specific, relentless, exhausting form of media attention that had nothing to do with her quarterly earnings or her development pipeline. It had to do with the question of why a 37-year-old billionaire had never once been publicly seen with a romantic partner. The tabloids had published 4 entirely fabricated boyfriend stories in that time. A business magazine had run a cover that still made her communications director flinch when anyone mentioned it. The headline had been, "The Loneliest Billionaire." She was not lonely. She was busy. She was tired. She was working. There was a difference, and she resented profoundly that no one seemed interested in making it. The real pressure, though, was not from the press. It was from her board. Celeste Hargrove had been an advisor to Walsh Properties for 11 years. She was brilliant, meticulous, and completely certain that Adrienne's public image needed to be, in Celeste's words, humanized, which was a polished way of saying seen with someone, preferably someone appropriate, someone who looked like the kind of person you'd expect to see beside the most powerful woman in commercial real estate. Celeste had said some version of this to Adrienne's face 3 times in the past 18 months. Adrienne had not responded to any of those conversations in a way that suggested she planned to change her behavior. Tonight, walking out of the Investor Summit at 7 p.m., she had one clear objective: reach the side entrance of her hotel, get to her suite, and disappear until morning. There were 11 reporters camped outside the main entrance. She knew because Renata, her assistant, precise and unflappable, had texted her account with timestamps. The plan was simple. The plan failed when her suitcase latch, which she had been meaning to replace since a trip to Seoul in March, gave way on the wet sidewalk 40 feet from the side entrance. 2 silk blouses, a laptop case, a folder of annotated market projections, 1 shoe, inexplicably, though she was still wearing both. All of it into a puddle forming fast in the rain. Adrienne dropped to her knees without thinking. There was no version of this that was dignified. She was aware of that. She gathered what she could. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from the cold, from exhaustion. The deep, specific exhaustion of a woman who had been performing competence for 6 hours straight and had not had a single moment in which she was simply allowed to be a person who sometimes dropped things. She did not hear him approach. She was aware of him only when a second pair of hands appeared beside hers. Steady, careful, moving with the particular economy of someone who was used to doing precise work in difficult conditions. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't say anything at all for the first 30 seconds. He just picked up her laptop case, stacked the folders, gathered the blouses quickly without looking at them the way a person handles something that belongs to someone else and requires care. Then he stood, held out his hand for the bag she was trying to refasten, and said simply, "I've got it." Adrienne looked up. Dark jacket, canvas bag, worn boots still carrying concrete dust that the rain hadn't fully washed off. Late 30s, quiet eyes. She did not recognize him, which was in itself unusual. Adrienne Walsh could walk through any room in any city in the world and within 90 seconds identify every person of professional consequence. This man registered as no one she had ever encountered, which meant he was either very new to this world or very deliberately outside of it. She would not know which for another 3 days. He produced the umbrella from his canvas bag like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was not a large umbrella. It covered one person comfortably, Two people, if those two people were willing to stand close enough that their shoulders nearly touched and accept that they were both going to get wet anyway. Neither of them remarked on this. They carried her bags the last half block to the hotel side entrance together. He took the heaviest one, the laptop case, without being asked. She managed the smaller bag and what remained of the suitcase, held shut now with the strap of his canvas bag cinched through the handle in a knot she did not know how to tie but recognized as purposeful. He didn't ask where she was going. She didn't explain. They walked in the specific silence of two people who have just shared a small practical crisis and have not yet figured out what to do with each other now that it is resolved. The rain got heavier as they reached the entrance. From inside the lobby through the wide glass doors and the warm amber light of the reception area, two people arriving together under a single umbrella, shoulders nearly touching, both wet, both carrying bags, looked exactly like one thing. They looked like a couple returning from somewhere, tired, comfortable with each other in the way that only comes from time. Neither of them saw this from the outside. Neither of them could have known. The doors opened. The warmth of the lobby hit them both. The young man at the front desk looked up with the professional warmth of someone very good at his job, and his face arranged itself into the particular expression of delighted recognition. "Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," Owen said, sliding a key card across the marble counter with the practiced ease of someone delivering a gift. "Your suite is ready. We've upgraded you to the Palm Terrace level as requested for your anniversary. Congratulations." Adrian stopped walking. The word anniversary hung in the air between them like something fragile. Darius opened his mouth. The sentence was already forming the simple clarifying sentence that would have ended this in 5 seconds. "Actually, we just met. She's a guest I was helping with bags." Easy. Clean. Done. He got as far as drawing breath. That was when Adrian turned to him. Just slightly, just enough. The smallest possible movement. And on her face, the face that had been composed and controlled through 6 hours of investor questions and 11 reporters and a broken suitcase in the rain, there was something different. Not desperation, not quite. More like the expression of a person who has just realized that an accident might solve a problem that nothing intentional has managed to fix. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at Owen and said, "Thank you so much." Warm. Easy. The voice of someone who had been expected. The voice of someone who belonged here. Owen beamed. The bellhop materialized from somewhere near the elevator bank and reached for the bags. 2 other staff members exchanged a small, pleased look, the kind that passes between people who like to witness a nice moment. Darius stood very still. The bags were moving toward the elevator. The lobby staff had collectively instantly thoroughly believed something that had never been true. And neither Adrian Walsh nor Darius Cole had said a single word to stop it. She caught him staring. She shrugged. The ghost of something not quite amusement, not quite apology, moved across her face for just a moment. As if she was as surprised by her own silence as he was. Darius looked at the elevator, then at the lobby. Then at the doors through which the bags were disappearing. The concierge was already moving toward the elevator bank, a congratulatory card in one hand and a bottle of something wrapped in foil in the other. Walking out now meant walking through all of that. It meant explaining. It meant scene. He was a man who did not make scenes. The elevator doors opened. He walked in. The doors closed around them and the lobby disappeared behind glass and steel. And for one long beat, neither of them spoke. Then Darius said very quietly, looking at the floor numbers climbing above the door, "You do know I was just helping you with your bags." A short pause. "I have no idea why he called you Mrs. Johnson, but I promise you I am not your husband." Adrian let out a sound that was half laugh, half exhale, the first genuine, unguarded sound she had made in what felt like several days. "I know exactly who you are not," she said. "You're the man who saved my laptop from a puddle. I'm the woman who is far too tired to explain a case of mistaken identity to hotel staff tonight." A beat. "Consider it a small mercy, for both of us." The elevator opened onto a corridor lined with white orchids. Darius looked at the flowers, then at the woman beside him. He had absolutely no idea what had just happened. The suite was the kind of room that made a point. Champagne in a silver bucket. A card in elegant script. Congratulations on 10 wonderful years. Candles already lit. A table set for two with linen napkins folded into something architectural. The city spread below the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain streaking the glass, lights blurring gold and white in the wet dark. Neither of them had lived a single one of those 10 years. Darius set the canvas bag down near the door. He looked at the room, then at Adrian Walsh, who was looking at the champagne with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Okay," he said. "Start from the beginning." She did. She explained it quietly, without drama. She had booked this suite months ago under her assistant Renata's family name Johnson to avoid exactly the kind of media presence currently stationed outside the building. A clerical mix-up somewhere in the hotel system had apparently decided that two people arriving together under the reservation were a married couple celebrating a milestone, and somewhere along the way the hotel had prepared accordingly. "I didn't plan this," she said. She meant the suite. She meant the mistake. She meant all of it. "I know," Darius said. She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because nobody plans a story that bad." She almost smiled. "There's something else." There was. She told him about the tabloids, about the 4 fake stories, about the 18 months of board pressure and Celeste's carefully worded recommendations, and the magazine cover that her communications director still couldn't mention without flinching. She told him that she was not lonely. She was clear about that. But she was exhausted in a specific way, the exhaustion of a woman who had been the subject of other people's stories about her personal life for so long that she had stopped being able to hear her own. "If for one night," she said, "the world believes I've quietly settled down, the press eases. Just slightly. Just enough for me to get through this week without someone publishing a photograph of me alone in a hotel lobby and calling it evidence of something." Darius listened to all of this without interrupting. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. He told her plainly when she was finished that he could not stay, that he had a life across town, ordinary, unremarkable, entirely his own. A daughter who needed to be picked up from her aftercare program by 8:30 in the morning. Kwame, who had agreed to cover tonight, but who had limits. He looked toward the door. He noticed the concierge lingering in the corridor visible through the suite's glass panel, a bottle in hand. A note from hotel management, a manner that suggested he was absolutely going to knock and deliver a brief but enthusiastic speech about the anniversary upgrade. Walking out now meant walking through that. It meant scene. It meant explaining. It meant the concierge's expression shifting, then the front desks, then the lobby staffs, then possibly someone with a phone taking note of the man leaving the suite of the woman who was on 11 news sites already that evening. Darius stood at the door for a moment. Adrian watched him. She didn't plead. She didn't perform. She just said very quietly, "Just tonight. One dinner so the staff doesn't ask questions. Tomorrow morning this disappears as if it never happened." He turned back to look at the room. The candles. The city below the rain-streaked windows. The card that said 10 wonderful years on behalf of a decade that belonged to nobody in this suite. "Rules," he said. She blinked. "Rules. No questions about each other's personal lives beyond what either of us volunteers. No physical affection beyond what the situation requires. When morning comes, this ends. No explanations owed to anyone." Adrian considered this for a moment. Then she extended her hand. He shook it. Both of them in that moment were completely certain this was a practical arrangement between two sensible adults who understood exactly what they were agreeing to. Both of them were wrong. Dinner arrived 40 minutes later. They ate at the table set for their fictional anniversary. Outside, the rain continued. Below them, the city moved through its Tuesday night without any awareness that two strangers were sitting across from each other in a room that had been prepared for a love story neither of them had written. The candles burned down slowly. Neither of them noticed when the conversation stopped being polite. The food was very good. Darius noted this the way he noted everything, quietly, precisely, without making a production of it. The duck was properly rested. The sauce had been reduced correctly. Someone in that kitchen understood that restraint was a form of skill. He said none of this out loud. What he said when Adrian asked how it was, "The column in the corner is decorative, but it's load-bearing." She looked up from her plate. "Excuse me?" "The column." He nodded toward the southeast corner of the dining area. "See how it's dressed in that marble casing? Most people assume it's ornamental, but the beam it carries runs across the entire east face of the building. If you removed it, the floor above would settle within 6 months." Adrian put down her fork, very slowly. "How do you know that?" Darius looked at his duck. "I notice buildings." She studied him for a moment, then picked up her fork again, filed it away, said nothing. They talked. He had a way of speaking that she was not used to, slow, deliberate. No filler, no performance. When he was thinking, he was quiet, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was just silence, the way silence is when someone is actually using it to think. He made her laugh for the first time at the 7-minute mark, with a comment so dry and so precisely timed that she was already laughing before she understood what was funny. She laughed again at the 20-minute mark, and the 40-minute mark. She could not remember the last time she had laughed 3 times in 1 hour. That was not a sad fact she had been aware of until this moment. Adrian told him about a business trip to Dubai. 3 meetings. 2 of them had circled inexplicably back to her hair. Not her proposal, her hair. She had sat in a conference room on the 62nd floor of a tower worth $2 billion and answered 4 questions about whether the curl pattern changed in humidity. "What did you say?" Darius asked. "I said it did, and then I closed the deal." He looked at her for a beat. "Good answer." "It was the only answer. If I'd said what I actually thought, I'd have closed nothing." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you actually think?" She considered whether to answer honestly. She decided to. The conversation shifted, opened, became something neither of them had intended. She talked about Dubai. He talked about nothing personal, but he talked about everything else, the way a building changes when the budget gets cut in the 3rd phase. The specific problem with glass towers in cities with significant temperature swings. The reason so many corporate lobbies feel dead no matter how much money is spent on them. She listened in a way that was sharp and alive. She caught things. She followed threads. She asked questions that told him she was genuinely curious, not performing curiosity. A difference he had learned to recognize over many years of sitting across tables from people who wanted something from him. Adrian Walsh, it appeared, did not want anything from him. That was so unusual it was briefly disorienting. She noticed, too, how differently he behaved with the hotel staff compared to everyone she normally brought into her orbit. He thanked the server by name. Not as a performance, the way you thank someone when you have noticed that they are a person and you want that to be acknowledged. When the busboy cleared a plate, Darius moved his glass slightly to make the job easier. The busboy didn't notice. Darius didn't need him to. She had worked with executives for 15 years. She had watched 1,000 dinners. She had never seen anyone do that unconsciously. It was the most attractive thing she had observed in a very long time. She did not say this. She noted it. By the time the table was cleared and the candles had burned to half their original height, something between them had shifted. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. Just the way a room temperature changes gradually, you don't notice it until you realize you are no longer cold. Darius slept on the couch, true to the agreement. Adrian lay in the enormous hotel bed and listened to the rain easing off outside. The city below was quieter now. 1 a.m., then 1:30. She thought about the column in the corner of the dining room and why she hadn't known it was load-bearing. She thought about the way he had shaken her hand when they made the rules. Not a handshake of formality, a handshake of a person who meant what they said. She thought about the last time someone had said something to her that she believed completely on the first pass. She could not find the memory. She lay there for a long time, not sleeping, and she thought quietly against every instinct of a woman who had never made a decision without a signed contract that she was not entirely sure she wanted morning to come as soon as they had planned. She smelled the coffee before she was fully awake. Not the flat, processed smell of a hotel machine, Real coffee. The kind that required someone to actually pay attention to what they were doing. Adrian sat up. The suite was still and pale in the early morning light. The city outside had gone from rain dark to that particular silver gray that New York mornings carry in late autumn, clean and cold and somehow honest. She found Darius in the small kitchen off the main living area. He had disassembled the hotel coffee machine, cleaned the internal filter with a pen cap, and reassembled it in what she estimated was about 8 minutes, based on how long she had been half awake, listening to the sounds without fully registering them. He handed her a cup without preamble. She took it, drank, looked at him over the rim. "You fixed the machine," she said. It had calcium buildup. The heat coil wasn't reaching full temperature. He looked at his own cup. "Better now." She stared at him for a moment. "You've been awake for how long?" "Since 5. He said it like 5 was a normal hour, which she suspected it was for him. "Zoe has school at 8:30. I need to head back to let Kwame go home." Zoe. He had mentioned his daughter briefly the night before, just the name, just the fact of her, nothing more. Adrian nodded, wrapped both hands around the cup. 5 minutes, she said. "I'll call you a car." Her phone rang before she finished the sentence. Renata. Texting, not calling. But the texts were arriving in rapid sequence, which meant it was serious. Press has moved to side entrance, 6 of them, 1 with long lens. Photographers in parking structure both levels. Service elevator is being watched. Someone has a photo of your bags being brought in last night. Hotel bellhop ID'd. Story in draft somewhere they're confirming details. Adrian read through them without expression. Darius watched her face. He knew without her saying anything what the texts said. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. He'd seen that particular expression before, the expression of someone who has just been told that the perimeter they thought they had controlled has been breached. "How bad?" he asked. She put the phone down. "If you leave right now and someone photographs you walking out at 6:15 in the morning, the story writes itself. Man in worn jacket leaves Walsh's hotel before sunrise. Entire weekend of headlines." Darius was quiet. He looked at the window, at the silver-gray city beyond it. He thought about Kwame, who would stay without complaint because he always did. He thought about Zoe, who was 9 and fully capable of getting herself breakfast, and would have strong opinions about what was on the TV in the meantime. He called Kwame. Kwame answered on the first ring, which meant he had not been sleeping. "You sound different," Kwame said without being asked anything. Darius ignored this. "Can you do the morning?" "Already eating her cereal," Kwame said. "She's watching something with dinosaurs. We're fine. Don't rush." Darius hung up. He looked at Adrian. "One more day." She didn't let her relief show. She was too practiced at that. But something in her posture changed subtly, the way a building settles when the right weight is added in the right place. She canceled her morning meetings. All of them. Renata handled the responses with the efficiency of a woman who had been fielding Adrian's cancellations for 4 years, and had long ago stopped requiring explanations. They spent the morning in the suite. Darius with a notebook he produced from his canvas bag. Not a journal, but a working notebook, filled with precise small sketches and measurements and notations, in a handwriting so compressed it was almost a private language. Adrian with her laptop and 3 simultaneous email chains she was managing in parallel. They worked in the same room, without talking, and the silence was comfortable. That was the word. Comfortable in the way that is genuinely rare, the way that usually requires years of shared time to build. Neither of them mentioned this. At noon, Adrian ordered lunch. At 12:15, it arrived. They ate at the same table where they had eaten dinner, now flooded with midday light. Darius looked up from his notebook and said, "The light in here is better than it should be for a north-facing suite." She followed his gaze to the ceiling. "Why?" "See the angle of that upper window. Whoever designed the renovation on this floor knew what they were doing. They angled the glass to catch afternoon bounce from the building across the street. Most hotels don't bother." Adrian looked at the ceiling, at the light, at the way it fell across the table. "I would never have noticed that," she said. Darius looked back at his notebook. Most people don't. She watched him for a moment. Something about this man, the way he saw things, the way he spoke about what he saw, the way he was equally at home in silence and in conversation, was unlike anything she had encountered in 15 years of boardrooms and negotiations and high-stakes dinners with people who were trying very hard to be impressive. He was not trying to be anything. That was what made him impossible to stop noticing. Over the following days, because there were following days, days that accumulated quietly without either of them making a formal decision to let them, Adrian's curiosity about Darius deepened, not in a simple way, in the way that specific confusion deepens when someone refuses to add up. He spoke fluent French on a phone call she overheard from the next room. Not conversational French, technical French. She caught the words tolérance structurelle and résistance à la compression before the call ended. She was fluent herself. She knew what those words meant. Structural tolerance, compressive resistance. She filed it. 2 days in, they walked to a small gallery near the hotel she had suggested. It partly for the air, partly because she wanted to see what he did in a room full of things to look at. He moved through the space slowly, deliberately. He paused in front of a photograph of a building in Osaka and said without preamble, "The attribution on this placard is wrong. That's Ando's influence, not his work. The concrete is poured differently. The margins are too wide." The gallery attendant who happened to be passing looked at the placard, looked at Darius, said nothing. Darius moved on. She filed it. On the third day in the hotel business center, she watched Darius intercept a conversation between a hotel manager and a corporate client who was planning a renovation. The manager had made a confident statement about load distribution that was Adrian would only understand this later, when she looked it up, factually incorrect, in a way that would have caused significant structural problems in any actual renovation. Darius said very quietly, "That's actually the other way around. You want the weight on the interior column, not the perimeter. The perimeter is decorative on that system." The manager blinked, nodded, said, "Right, yes, of course." Darius walked away before the manager fully processed what had happened. She filed it. And then there was the deflection. Every time she pressed gently, carefully, because she was not someone who pushed without purpose, asking what exactly his work involved, which projects had his name on them, what the thing he was working on in that notebook actually was, Darius redirected. Not rudely, gracefully. He turned the conversation back to her with a skill that told her this was practiced. Not a habit, a discipline. He had been doing this for a long time. She let it go. Each time. Partly because of their rules. Partly because she had made a professional career out of reading people. And she understood that pressing someone who deflects this deliberately never produces the information you actually want. It only produces performance. But partly, and this was the part she hadn't expected because she genuinely enjoyed not knowing, that was new. She was a woman who built power out of information, who read a room within 90 seconds, who could recite the net worth of every major player in her industry from memory in alphabetical order. She did not enjoy not knowing things. She had never enjoyed not knowing things. And yet, there was something about the specific mystery of Darius Cole, who spoke 3 languages and noticed load-bearing columns and moved through the world in worn boots carrying a notebook full of incomprehensible, beautiful sketches that felt less like a problem to solve and more like something rare, the rare sensation of a person who had not yet been fully mapped. She thought about this at night, after he had gone back to his side of the suite, back to the couch, true to the agreement every single night. She thought about how in her world everyone wanted something, a deal, a connection, a signature, an introduction that could be leveraged into another introduction. Everyone arrived at her with their hands already out. Darius arrived at her with his hands full of someone else's wet belongings and never asked for anything in return. Not even information. Not even, frankly, her name, which she had eventually given him, and which he had received with the equanimity of a man who did not read financial magazines, and therefore did not carry any particular reaction to it. He had said, "Adrian," as if it were just a name, which was, she had to admit, what it was. She lay awake on the fourth night, thinking about the column in the corner of the dining room, about the French phone call, about the building in Osaka, about the word tolerance and what it meant in the context of structures, and whether it could mean the same thing in the context of people. The amount of stress a thing can bear before it changes shape permanently. She thought about how much she had changed shape, over 15 years, under the weight of expectation and scrutiny, and the constant requirement to be something legible to a room full of people who needed to understand her in order to feel comfortable investing in her. She thought about how Darius Cole had not once in 4 days seemed to need to understand her in order to feel comfortable. He was just there, present, attentive, undemanding. And that, more than anything she had encountered in years, felt like something worth protecting. She was still thinking about this when she fell asleep. When she woke at 5 a.m., he had already made the coffee. On the 5th day, Adrian did something she hadn't done in longer than she could calculate. She canceled all of it. Every meeting, every call. The press briefing her communications director had scheduled for 11 a.m. The lunch with 2 institutional investors. The afternoon review with her CFO on the Q4 pipeline. Renata handled the cascading fallout with the calm efficiency of a woman who had seen Adrian cancel things before, though never quite this many at once, and whose face communicated nothing beyond professional acceptance. Adrian dismissed her security detail for the afternoon. Then she asked Darius to show her the parts of the city that didn't appear in any tourism brochure. He looked at her for a moment. "You sure?" he said. "I've been to every rooftop bar and private dining room in this city," she said. "Show me something else." He thought about it for a moment. Then he picked up the canvas bag. He took her to a small arts district tucked behind an old rail line in the lower part of the borough, a stretch of streets where painters sold canvases from folding tables under overhang tarps, where the smell of machine oil from a working metal shop mixed with fresh bread from a bakery that had been run by the same family for 43 years. He knew the baker's name, Miguel. He introduced Adrian as a friend. Miguel did not react to her name. He gave them both coffee in paper cups and a piece of bread that was still warm and said something in Spanish to Darius that made Darius laugh. A real laugh. The kind that happens before you decide whether to let it. Adrian could not remember the last time she had been introduced as simply a friend. No title, no company, no context. Just a friend. They walked. Darius moved through the neighborhood with the ease of someone who had spent years learning its specific logic, which blocks connected to which, where the light was best at this time of afternoon, why this particular underpass was worth stopping to look at rather than walking through. He showed her a mural that covered an entire city block, 40 feet high. 1,000 details if you looked closely enough, faces embedded in the pattern, a skyline hidden in the brushwork at the upper right corner. "How long did this take?" she asked. 3 years, 4 artists. One of them worked on it every weekend for 2 years straight and died before it was finished. He looked at the upper left quadrant. His section is the one that carries the whole thing. Structurally as a composition. Everything else builds on what he laid down. She looked at where he was looking. She saw it. The backbone, the foundation, hidden in plain sight, carrying everything above it. She thought about that for a long time without saying so. They sat for 2 hours in a cramped coffee shop with mismatched chairs and a handwritten menu and a cat asleep on the windowsill. Adrian sipped from a chipped ceramic mug and looked out at the street and realized she had no idea what time it was. She could not remember the last time she had not known what time it was. She was not checking her phone, not scanning the room, not calculating who was watching or what the image looked like from the outside. She was just sitting in a coffee shop with a man who had brought her here because she asked him to, drinking coffee, watching the street. The freedom of it was almost physical, like removing something she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing the weight. Darius watched her from across the table. He understood something about her that afternoon that no earnings report or magazine profile could have told him. Something simple and important and slightly heartbreaking. Beneath the composed, unshakable exterior that walked into boardrooms and investor summits and press conferences, Adrian Walsh was quite simply lonely. Not the loneliness of isolation, the loneliness of a person surrounded by people who needed her to be something specific all the time without interruption. He did not say this. He just ordered her another coffee and told her about the mural artist. His name had been Franklin Reyes. He had been 31 when he started the mural. He had painted on weekends because during the week he drove a delivery truck. He had never once sought public credit. "Why not?" Adrian asked. Darius considered the question. He used to say the work was the point, not the name on the work. Adrian looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. She almost said something. She didn't. That evening back at the hotel, she opened her laptop to review a development report her team had sent. A striking glass structure recently completed downtown. Her company was considering acquiring the building for repositioning. Critics had praised its unusual relationship with natural light, the way the upper facade angled to capture afternoon reflection from the adjacent tower, the way the lobby felt twice its actual size because of the skylight geometry. She turned the screen toward Darius absently, expecting nothing more than polite interest. She watched his face. His expression shifted. Just for a moment. Just a fraction. The way a person's face moves when they see something that belongs to them. Recognition followed immediately by the trained reflex to cover it. He covered it quickly, but not quickly enough. She said nothing that night. She waited until he was asleep. Then she typed his full name into a search engine for the very first time. What appeared on her screen left her staring at the tablet glow for nearly an hour. She had expected to find something, some piece of the puzzle she had been accumulating. The French phone call, the load-bearing column, the Osaka attribution, the way he moved through buildings like a person reading a text in their first language. She had not expected this. Darius Cole, independent architect, 7 internationally recognized structures across 4 cities and 3 countries. 3 major design awards, all declined in person. No interviews on record. No professional photograph published in any outlet. His name appeared in industry journals, always briefly, always without a face attached, usually in the context of something else, a building that had won an award, a design that had been cited by another architect in a lecture, a structural innovation that had quietly influenced work in his field for the past 6 years. Always the work, never the man. She read further. She found the article. It was 9 years old. Published in a trade journal she had read exactly twice in her life. The headline was clinical the way trade journalism often is when it is covering something that should be scandalous but is being handled with professional restraint. Meridian Center architect, credit dispute resolved. Cole confirmed as lead designer. She read it twice. The Meridian Center in Chicago, 44 stories, glass and Indiana limestone. A building she had seen on a trip to Chicago 6 years ago and had remembered because it was the kind of structure that made you stop and look at it twice, not because it was showy, but because it was right. Because it had been built by someone who understood that the highest achievement in architecture is making a building feel inevitable. That building had been credited for 2 years after its completion to a senior white partner at the firm where Darius Cole worked. A man named Gerald Ashworth. A man who, according to the article, had contributed to the project primarily in the capacity of signatory on the initial contract. The credit dispute had gone to arbitration, then to litigation. It had taken 14 months. Darius had won. He had won. And then he had walked away from the firm, from the industry's formal structures, from every platform that might have used the wind to build something for him. He had simply walked away. There was one more thing in the article. A quote from Darius, which the journalist noted was the only statement he had made for the record throughout the entire 14-month process. "I didn't build the Meridian Center to win an argument about my name. I built it because I believed the city needed it. The argument was a distraction. The building is not." She set the tablet face down. She sat in the dark for a long time. She thought about the last time she had been in a room where someone tried to erase her name from something she had built. It had happened twice in her first 5 years. Different mechanisms, same intention. The kind of behavior that doesn't announce itself as malice. It just arrives as process, as protocol, as the way things are done here. She had fought both times, loudly, publicly, at significant cost to her early relationships in the industry. She had won, but she had never not once walked away from the fight. She had stayed and taken up more space and made herself more visible and turned her name into something that could not be removed from a room she had entered. She had always assumed that was the only option. The idea that a person could win and then choose silence, not as defeat, not as resignation, but as a deliberate act of self-protection, was something she had never seriously considered. She understood it now, completely. She lay down, did not sleep, looked at the ceiling. In the morning, she made the coffee herself this time. She set it on the table. When Darius came out of the bedroom, she had taken the couch the previous night, insisting, and he had accepted after brief argument. She slid her tablet across the table toward him. The article was already open. He sat down, looked at the screen. He did not pretend he didn't know what it was. He picked up the tablet, read the headline. Set it face down slowly the way you set down something that has finally stopped being a secret. He exhaled. "Why would you hide something like this?" Adrian asked, not accusatory, genuinely confused. She was a woman who had built power out of visibility. The idea of deliberately choosing obscurity over recognition was not something her professional framework had a category for. Darius looked at the coffee in his hands. He said, "The moment people know what I've built, they stop seeing who I am." He paused. "They start seeing what they can use, a connection, an introduction, a deal that might benefit from being associated with something that has already been recognized." Another pause. "I wanted you to know the man who helped carry your bags in the rain, not the name attached to a few buildings you might have read about somewhere." Adrian sat with that. For a long time. She, who had spent her entire adult life being measured primarily by her company's balance sheet, by the number attached to her name, the assets under her management, the quarterly projections that determined whether rooms full of investors treated her with confidence or began quietly asking each other questions about succession planning. She understood precisely and completely what it meant to wonder whether anyone had ever seen the person beneath the number. She had spent 15 years wondering that. She had just never admitted it out loud. In that quiet suite with coffee going cold between them and the morning light coming in at the angle that Darius had noticed on the first day, the angle that made the room feel twice its actual size, something shifted permanently between them. Not romance, not yet. Recognition. Two people who had each in their own way been hiding from the same thing. Adrian looked at the face-down tablet, then at Darius. "The Meridian Center," she said. "I stood in front of that building for 10 minutes once, on a trip to Chicago. I couldn't figure out why it felt different from everything around it." He looked up. "It felt like someone who cared," she said. "Not about what it looked like, about what it felt like to be inside it." Darius was quiet for a moment. "That's the whole point," he said. She nodded. "I know," she said. Now, it was a hotel guest who took it. Darius and Adrian had gone for a walk on the 6th evening along the waterfront near the hotel in the specific blue dusk of a late autumn city. They had walked for 90 minutes, talking mostly, sometimes not. Heads bent toward each other against the wind coming off the water, hands close but not touching. The posture of two people who had found, without planning, to the comfortable physical proximity that usually takes much longer to build. A woman 3 rows behind them on the waterfront promenade recognized Adrian. Not immediately, it took her a minute, and a second look, and then the quiet certainty of someone who has seen a face often enough in publications to know it even out of context and out of framing. She took one photograph, then a second. Then she posted both to a financial news aggregate site with the caption, "Looks like at Victoria Walsh Properties isn't so alone after all." She meant it warmly. She had no idea what she was starting. By 9 p.m., 14 different outlets had picked up the image. The photo was not dramatic. It was not compromising. It was two people along a waterfront, close, heads angled toward each other, looking like exactly what they had accidentally become. People who were comfortable together. The headlines, however, were decisive. Walsh finally finds love. Mystery man spotted with billionaire CEO. Who is the man walking beside Adrienne Walsh? Sources say she's not talking. Is this why the Walsh Properties CEO has been so quiet? Photo. Adrienne's phone began ringing at 10:47 p.m. She was still awake. She read the first 3 texts board members, both of them her publicist, and put the phone face down on the nightstand. She looked at the ceiling. Darius was standing at the window, watching the city below. He had already seen the articles. Kwame had texted him a link at 9:15 with no message attached, which was its own kind of message. "How many?" he asked. 14 as of 20 minutes ago. Probably more by morning. He was quiet. She said, "You should know the photo is clean. There's nothing in it." "I know." He was still looking at the window. "That's not the problem." She knew what the problem was. She had known it was coming. She had been in this industry long enough to understand that the problem was not the photograph itself. The problem was the machinery that a photograph like this sets in motion. Board members, publicists, reporters who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening, and Celeste Hargrove, who had been waiting longer than any of them. She didn't let herself go to that yet. She would deal with Celeste in the morning. What she said to Darius that night was honest, more honest than she had intended. She said, "I think this needs to end." He turned from the window. She continued, "Before it becomes something neither of us can walk back from." He looked at her. She said, "I know. I just didn't expect it to feel like losing something." The confession surprised them both. It hung there in the air of the suite for a moment. Between the city below and the face-down phone and the tablet with the article about the Meridian Center that was still on the table, where neither of them had moved it, Darius said, "We don't have to end the fiction and end everything. We could end the fiction and start honestly as something else." "Something else," she said. "Friends," he said. "Actual friends. No performance. No rules about what we can ask each other." She considered this. Looked at the phone on the nightstand, at the window, at him. "Okay," she said. She canceled the remainder of her schedule the next morning. They spent the day as themselves, not as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, not as a story in progress, not as a performance for hotel staff. Just 2 people who had, through a sequence of accidents and small decisions, found each other's company more valuable than they had planned. And Darius called Kwame. Told him he'd be home tomorrow. Kwame said, "You said that yesterday." Darius said, "Tomorrow I mean it." Kwame said, "Sure." Celeste Hargrove's platinum blonde hair was maintained every 5 weeks at a salon in the Upper East Side that did not advertise and did not take walk-ins. The appointment cost $450. She had kept it for 11 years. Her suits were bespoke. Her office on the 38th floor of a midtown tower had a view she had specifically negotiated for. Her firm, Hargrove & Vane Investment Consulting, had 19 partners, 47 clients, and a reputation in financial circles as the kind of advisory operation that got called when the situation required absolute precision rather than creativity. Celeste did not believe in creativity. She believed in frameworks, in outcomes that had been mapped in advance, in the specific kind of authority that comes from never being caught off guard. She had been an advisor to Walsh Properties for 11 years. She had watched Adrienne Walsh build an empire from a single Brooklyn conversion to a multi-billion-dollar operation spanning 4 continents. She had been in certain critical moments genuinely useful to that process. She had also been in the same period quietly building something for herself. Celeste's philosophy about women in positions of extreme power had been articulated once to a junior associate who had asked the wrong question at the wrong moment. A woman at the top of a major corporation cannot afford to look like she needs anyone. Romance reads as weakness, dependency reads as vulnerability, and vulnerability in a boardroom reads as opportunity for someone else. She had said some version of this to Adrienne's face 3 times in the past 18 months. Adrienne had not been persuaded. When the photograph broke on Tuesday night, Celeste did not panic. She did not react. She sat at her desk, still at the office at 10 p.m., which was not unusual, and read all 14 articles. Then she looked at the photograph for a long time. The man in the photograph was unknown. No tag, no identification, just a face that no outlet had yet been able to identify. This was either a significant problem or a significant opportunity. Celeste was good at finding opportunities in problems. She made 2 calls. The first was to Francis Aldridge, one of the board members, a man she had cultivated carefully over 6 years. She did not tell him what to think. She was too good at this to be that direct. She simply raised certain questions. Questions about optics, about the timing of this, given the shareholder meeting in 30 days, about the wisdom of a CEO being photographed in what appeared to be a personal relationship with an individual whose background could not currently be verified. Francis listened, asked 2 questions of his own, thanked her. The second call was to Lena Park. Lena Park was an investigative journalist who covered Walsh Properties for a financial news outlet. She was sharp, thorough, and had built her reputation on getting information that other reporters couldn't get. Celeste had been feeding her contextual background on Walsh Properties for 4 years. Not leaks. Nothing that crossed a legal line. Just context. Framing. The kind of information that shapes how a reporter understands what they're looking at. What Celeste told Lena that night was simple. The man in the photograph had no verifiable public profile. No company registration, findable through standard searches. No digital footprint consistent with a professional of any established standing. In Celeste's considered view expressed as personal concern for Adrian's well-being, not as professional calculation, this was worth looking into. What Celeste did not tell Lena was why she was telling her this at 10:45 p.m. She did not need to. Lena was a good reporter. She would find what she found. And Celeste had enough experience with journalists to know that a story framed as, "Who is this person and why can't anyone identify him?" had a particular gravity that was difficult to resist. She hung up. Looked at the photograph again. A man in a worn jacket, canvas bag, boots with concrete dust that the camera had caught in the waterfront lighting. Celeste had grown up in a specific world. A world with specific assumptions about what power looked like and what it didn't. About who belonged in which rooms. About the relationship between appearance and credibility that she had never in 51 years found reason to seriously question. She scheduled an emergency board pre-meeting briefing for the following morning at the hotel, under the pretense of reviewing materials for the shareholder presentation. She arrived at 8 a.m., and Darius Cole was in the lobby. She recognized him from the photograph immediately. The jacket, the bag, the boots still bearing traces of work she could not name and would not have found interesting. She felt in the immediate moment of seeing him a certainty that required no evidence to support itself. She knew exactly who this man was. Or rather, she knew exactly who he was not. And in her framework, that was sufficient information to proceed. Celeste approached him the way she approached everything. Calmly, precisely. With the particular confidence of a person who has never been wrong about this kind of thing and therefore has no reason to consider the possibility. "Good morning," she said. The tone was pleasant. The smile was professional. "Are you here for the catering arrangements? The board dinner is on Thursday, but typically the vendor coordination happens earlier in the week." Darius looked at her. "I'm not a caterer," he said. "I see." The smile held. "A setup crew, then? The AV team isn't usually on site until the afternoon before. I'm a guest." A pause. Fractional. The kind that most people would not notice. "A guest," Celeste said. "That's correct." She let her gaze move very briefly, very deliberately from his face to his jacket, to the canvas bag over his shoulder, to the boots on the marble lobby floor, which were clean today but carried the specific kind of wear that does not come from offices or boardrooms or restaurants with dress codes. "Forgive me," she said. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Celeste Hargrove. I'm a senior advisor to Walsh Properties." "Darius Cole." She waited. When no additional information was offered, she continued. "And what brings you to the hotel this morning, Mr. Cole?" "I'm staying here." Another pause, longer this time. "I see," she said again. "And you're acquainted with Adrian Walsh?" "Yes." "In what capacity, if I might ask?" He looked at her steadily. "Personal." The word landed in the air between them. Celeste absorbed it, adjusted. "Of course," she said. "How lovely." She turned slightly toward the lobby manager, who was stationed at the concierge desk 15 feet away, and had been watching this exchange with the carefully neutral expression of a man who knew exactly who both of these people were and had no intention of involving himself. "Could you tell me?" Celeste said to the manager, her voice carrying just enough so that the two people seated in the lobby chairs behind her could hear. "Who authorized residential floor access for this individual?" The lobby manager said carefully, "Mr. Cole is a registered guest, Ms. Hargrove." Celeste's smile did not waver. "Of course he is." She turned back to Darius. "I apologize, I wasn't aware. The building security protocols here are simply very thorough. I'm sure you understand." Darius said nothing. He just looked at her, with the expression of a man who understood precisely what was happening, who had understood it from the third sentence, who was not surprised by it, not wounded by it, not moved by it, just watching. Celeste had encountered resistance before, pushback, people who didn't like being managed. She was very good at outlasting all of those things. What she was not accustomed to was stillness. The specific settled stillness of someone who has decided that your certainty about them is not their problem. "I would simply like to clarify," Celeste said softer, now more confidential, "that the board has certain responsibilities regarding the company's image, particularly in the weeks leading up to the shareholder meeting. And I'm sure you can appreciate that any association with Ms. Walsh, however personal, carries implications that extend." Celeste. One word. From behind her. Adrian Walsh stood at the elevator bank. She had come down from the suite 5 minutes earlier, before Celeste had arrived to meet someone in the lobby. She had seen the scene from 30 feet away and had walked toward it slowly, listening. She had heard enough. She did not look at Celeste. She looked at Darius. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he said. She looked at Celeste then. The look was not hostile. It was something more specific than hostile. It was the look of a woman who has just watched someone do something she will not forget. "Celeste," she said, "thank you for coming early. I'll be with you in 20 minutes. You can wait in the meeting room on the second floor." A beat. "Renata will get you anything you need." Celeste held Adrian's gaze for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to register that she was not intimidated, short enough to avoid escalation. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." She excused herself, walked toward the elevator. Back straight, expression unchanged. But in 11 years of working alongside Adrian Walsh, Celeste Hargrove had never once been dismissed from a lobby conversation about a man. She was good enough at what she did to understand what that meant. She understood it on the elevator ride to the second floor. She understood it while she waited in the meeting room for 20 minutes that felt longer. And she understood with the particular clarity of a person who has just realized they have underestimated the situation, that she needed to move faster than she had planned. She began that afternoon. 3 moves, precise. Each one designed to accomplish something specific. The first was Francis Aldridge. She called him at 2 p.m., not to tell him what to think. She was too experienced for that. She raised questions, which was a more durable technique. Questions that could not be argued with because they were not claims, and which could not be ignored because they were pointed. Was the board aware of the extent of the media coverage? Had anyone done a background review on the individual in the photograph? Was it the board's position that this association was consistent with the image Walsh Properties had cultivated over the past decade? Was there a responsible party for managing the narrative before the shareholder meeting? Francis listened. He was not an unintelligent man. He knew what was happening. He also knew that Celeste had been right about enough things over enough years that dismissing her felt risky. He said he would make some calls. That was all Celeste needed. The second move was Petra Voss. Petra was the newest board member appointed 18 months ago, still finding her footing in the dynamics of the group. Celeste had cultivated her carefully, taking her to lunch 3 times in the past year, being generous with context and history. Petra trusted Celeste's read of situations. Celeste did not call Petra. She texted her. Just a link to the photograph and 3 words, "Worth discussing privately." Petra responded within 12 minutes. "Agreed, tomorrow morning." The third move was Lena Park. But this time, she gave Lena something more specific than the night before. She had spent the morning and early afternoon doing what she was good at, making calls, pulling threads, using her network to build a picture. What she had found about Darius Cole was in her framework, both less and more than she had expected. Less, he was not a threat. He was not dangerous. He had no scandal in his background, no legal exposure beyond the Meridian Center case, which was resolved and which had ruled in his favor. More, his entire professional identity was built on deliberate invisibility. No firm, no registered business in New York, a single LLC registered in Delaware 9 years ago. No employees, no website, no professional profiles of any kind. In Celeste's world, this was not a profile of a private person. It was the profile of a person who had something to hide. She did not consider the possibility that it might be the profile of a person who simply valued above almost everything else the right to control what others knew about him. She told Lena Park, "The man photographed with Walsh has constructed an identity that is essentially impossible to verify through standard channels. We believe this is worth exploring from a due diligence perspective, given the exposure it creates for the company." She used the word "we" deliberately. It implied the board. It did not specify which members. Lena thanked her, said she was already on it. Celeste put her phone down. Meanwhile, across the city, Darius was in his apartment for the first time in 6 days. The apartment was exactly as he had left it. Small, clean, precise. The blueprints on the wall, the drafting table, Zoe's drawings pinned alongside rockets and towers and bridges drawn in the large, confident strokes of a 9-year-old who did not yet know that bridges were difficult. He stood in the middle of the apartment for a while, just looking at it. Kwame had called twice that afternoon. Darius had answered the second call. "You need to see what's in the news," Kwame said. "I've seen it. All of it. Enough of it." Kwame was quiet for a moment. "There's a story being assembled. The angle is that you can't be verified, that your background is opaque. They're framing it as a concern." Darius sat down at the drafting table, looked at the blueprints. "I know," he said. "Do you know who's driving it?" He had guessed, he hadn't confirmed. But he had spent enough years reading rooms to recognize the shape of a move when it was being made against him. "Someone who doesn't like that I'm in a room she considers hers," he said. Kwame was quiet again. Then, "What are you going to do?" Darius looked at Zoe's drawings, the bridges. "Nothing for now," he said. Kwame said, "That's not going to be enough." Darius said, "I know." He hung up, sat at the drafting table, did not open the blueprints in front of him. Thought about a woman in an emerald green gown on the floor of a hotel suite with her shoes off and her phone turned over. Thought about the Meridian Center. Thought about what it had cost to fight once and what it had cost to walk away. Thought about whether this time the fight was worth something different. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. He told her that evening. He was standing at the window of the suite, his coat on canvas bag over his shoulder. The posture of a man who has already made a decision. When Adrian came back from a call that had lasted 40 minutes and had been conducted in the tightest, most controlled voice she used when she was not controlling anything at all. "I should go," Darius said. She stopped in the middle of the room. "Before the press connects the rest of the picture," he said. "Before someone publishes something that requires you to respond. Walking away now, quietly, before it escalates is cleaner for you." She looked at him. He continued, "You don't owe me anything. This was an accident we let run too long. Walking out is easy, I've done it before." She didn't say don't go. She didn't say anything for a moment, because she knew he was right. She knew it in the specific way that the right thing to do and the thing you want to do are different, and knowing they're different doesn't make either of them wrong. She said, "The call was the board. Francis called an emergency pre-meeting. Celeste has been working the phone." Darius nodded. "I figured. They want me to clarify, publicly, either confirm that there's nothing to report, or confirm that there's something which gives them the narrative," he said, "which is what she wants." Adrian looked at him. He had understood immediately and completely the shape of what Celeste had done. She said, "She's going to have Lena Park publish something about you, about the invisibility. She'll frame it as a question mark." "I know." "Darius, I know." He said it gently. "And that's exactly why I should go now, before the question mark becomes a story." She looked at his bag, at his coat, at the drafting notebook he had tucked under his arm, the one with the small, compressed sketches and the private language. The one that had been on the table every morning when she woke up, and which she had never once asked to look at because he hadn't offered, and she had respected that. She looked at the table set for two, empty now, candles long burned down. She looked at him. She said nothing to stop him, because she wasn't sure asking him to stay was fair to either of them, because they had not promised each other anything, because whatever had been growing between them, real, unmistakable, neither of them would have denied it in private, had not been given the space to become something with a name yet. And you cannot ask a person to bear the cost of protecting something that has no name. Darius walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on it. For a moment, he didn't open it. He just stood there. Then he said, without turning, "The building you asked me about. The glass structure. The one with the skylight geometry in the lobby?" She waited. "I spent 19 months on that one," he said. "The skylight took 6 of those months to get right. I must have redrawn it 40 times. I wanted the light to change across the day, morning coming in sharp from the east, afternoon going warm from the west. The lobby feeling different at 10 a.m. than it does at 4 p.m. He paused. "Nobody ever writes about that. They write about the facade. Nobody ever stays long enough to notice what the light does over a full day." She stood very still. "You noticed," he said. He opened the door. He left. Adrian stood in the suite for a long time after the door closed. Then she picked up her phone and called her communications director. She said, "Cancel the prepared remarks. I'm going to the press availability tomorrow without notes." The communications director said, "I don't think that's advisable." "I know you don't," she said. "Cancel the notes." Then she called Renata. "I need one specific piece of information," she said. "The Meridian Center in Chicago. Tell me everything publicly available about who built it." Renata said, "Give me 20 minutes." Adrian sat down on the couch, the one where Darius had slept every night without being asked, to honoring an agreement they had made in the first hour they knew each other. She waited. And while she waited, she thought about a man standing at a window, pointing out that a column that looked decorative was actually carrying the whole weight of the floor above it. She thought about how long it took to build something designed to last. Darius was home. The apartment was quiet, late. Zoe was asleep. He could hear her breathing through the half-open door of her room, the specific, even rhythm of a child who has not yet learned how to lie awake, worrying. He envied her this. He made himself a bowl of rice, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looked at the east-facing window, the one he had angled correctly during the renovation to catch the morning light. It was dark now. The glass reflected the kitchen back at him. He looked like a man he recognized. Not the version that had been in the newspaper tonight, Walsh's mystery companion identity unknown, just himself. Just Darius. His phone rang at 10:52 p.m. The number was not saved. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "You said you noticed the light changes," Adrian said. No preamble, as if they had been in the middle of a conversation and she was picking it back up. "In a building, over the course of a full day." He set down the bowl. "Yes." "Does that happen in this city, in November?" "Less dramatically than in summer, but yes. If the geometry is right, yes." A pause. "What are you cooking?" she asked. He looked at the bowl. "Rice." "At 11 p.m.? It's that, or cereal. Zoe had the last of the cereal for breakfast. There was a moment. Something that might have been a laugh, very quiet. She said, "Celeste has been calling board members since this afternoon. She's told them you have no verifiable professional background. She's framing you as an unknown quantity." "I know." "Lena Park is writing something." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you angry?" Darius thought about this honestly. "No," he said. "I've met Celeste Hargrove before. Different names, different buildings. Same certainty about who I am before they've looked." He looked at the window. "She's not wrong that she can do damage. She's just wrong about why." Adrian said, "I want to tell the truth." He waited. "Not about us," she said. "About you. About the Meridian Center. About what was done to your name and what you won and what you walked away from. I want to say it before she gets to write her version." He was quiet. She said, "I'm going to the press availability tomorrow without prepared remarks. I'm going to say what actually happened. That I met you in the rain. That the hotel made a mistake. That I didn't correct it. A beat. And that you are one of the most quietly extraordinary people I have met in my life." The last sentence surprised him. Not because it wasn't true, because she said it plainly. The way she said everything directly, without performance, without asking him to respond to it. He looked at Zoe's drawings on the wall, the rockets and towers and bridges in confident 9-year-old strokes. He said, "You're asking me to come back?" "Yes." He said, "That's a different thing from what we were doing before." "I know," she said. "I'm asking for the different thing." He was quiet for a long time. The apartment breathed around him. The city outside moved through its late-night rhythms, a siren somewhere, a car horn, the specific acoustic signature of a city that never fully sleeps. "I'll think about it," he said. She said, "Okay." He said, "Adrian." She said, "Yes." He said, "The light in November is different, not less, just different. More horizontal, more honest somehow." A pause. "I'll look for it tomorrow," she said. They hung up. He did not sleep that night. He sat at the drafting table with the blueprints open in front of him and the city moving quietly below, and thought about what it cost to go back into a fight you had already fought once, and what it meant when the thing you were protecting was different this time. Kwame arrived at 7 a.m. with 2 coffees and the expression of a man who had been reading the news since before it was decent to be awake. He let himself in with the key Darius had given him 6 years ago. He put 1 coffee on the kitchen counter and sat down at the table. He did not say anything immediately. He waited while Darius came out of the bedroom which he had eventually moved to at 3 a.m. and which had provided approximately 2.5 hours of sleep. Zoe was still asleep. The apartment was still. Kwame said, "I read everything. I figured. You've been trending since midnight. Not big numbers yet, but building." Kwame. "There's a piece going up on a financial news site this morning. No byline yet, but the framing is clear. Unknown background, unverifiable professional history. Who is the man Walsh won't explain?" He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Celeste Hargrove's fingerprints are all over it." "I know." Kwame looked at him. "You know what I'm going to say." Darius sat down across from him. "You're going to say I've been hiding." "I'm going to say," Kwame said carefully, "that what you called a philosophy I have always suspected was fear wearing a suit." Darius looked at his coffee. "You built things that deserve to exist with your name on them," Kwame said. "You won a fight that would have ended most people, and then you treated the win like a loss. You walked away. You built your whole life around the idea that if you stayed invisible, they couldn't take anything from you again." "They couldn't," Darius said. "No," Kwame said. "And you also couldn't give anything. You couldn't be known. You couldn't be seen. You couldn't let anyone close enough to—" He stopped, started again. "You have a daughter who draws bridges on the wall next to your blueprints, and you've been teaching her without meaning to that the right way to move through the world is to hide what you've built." The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city was moving into morning. Darius looked at the wall, at the blueprints, at Zoe's drawings beside them. He had put them there together because she had asked him to. She had wanted to see her bridges next to his buildings. She had said, so people know we're the same. He had never once considered what it taught her that his buildings had no names on them. Kwame said, "This woman, Adrienne Walsh, she already knows what you built. Lena Park is about to tell the whole world. The only question is whether you're there to tell your own story or whether Celeste Hargrove gets to tell it for you." Darius was quiet for a long time. "She called me last night," he said. "I know. You sound different. You said that before. It's still true." Darius picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. "I told her I'd think about it," he said. Kwame said, and Darius looked at the bridges on the wall. Zoe's bridges. Confident, large, unafraid of the scale of what they were attempting. He stood up. "I need to be back before Zoe wakes up," he said. Kapame said, "Go." The Lena Park story dropped at 7:14 a.m. It was not the story Celeste had fed her, or rather it was, but only in the way that a seed is the beginning of a plant that turns out to be something completely different from what you intended to grow. Lena Park had taken the information about Darius Cole's unverifiable digital footprint and done what good journalists do. She had kept pulling. She had found the Meridian Center case by 11 p.m. the previous night. She had found Gerald Shaw, now 68, retired, one of the most respected architects of his generation, a black man who had worked alongside Darius Cole for 4 years at the firm and had watched what happened by midnight. Gerald Shaw had been waiting, she would later write, for someone to ask. But Lena's story had not yet published when Adrian's communications director called at 7 a.m. to say the prepared talking points were ready and the press availability was confirmed for 2 p.m. Adrian said, "Cancel the talking points." Long pause from the communications director. "I'm going to speak," Adrian said. "Just not from notes." Another pause, longer. "I strongly advise against." "I know you do," Adrian said. "I'll see you at the venue at 1:45. She showered, dressed carefully, not the armor of a major public appearance, something more honest than that. A dark blazer over a simple shirt. Her hair down, which she rarely wore in professional settings, because she had learned early that it invited comments she didn't have the energy for. She wore it down today because she was tired of making those calculations. Renata met her in the lobby at 1:30 with a brief on the questions that were likely to come up, and the specific journalists who would be aggressive. Adrian read it in the car, put it away. The venue was a hotel conference room 2 blocks away. Her publicist had arranged it quickly, working from Celeste's pressure that something needed to be said publicly. There were 22 journalists, cameras. Lena Park was in the 3rd row, notebook already open. Adrian stood at the podium. She did not look at the prepared notes her communications director was holding just out of frame with the expression of a person watching a slow-motion accident. She said, 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night, my suitcase broke open on a wet sidewalk about a block from this hotel. A man I had never met knelt down beside me in the rain and helped me pick up my things. We walked to the hotel entrance together under one umbrella that wasn't big enough for both of us." She paused. "The front desk clerk assumed we were a couple returning from a trip. He called us Mr. and Mrs. Johnson." Another pause. "I didn't correct him." The room was very quiet. She continued, "I didn't correct him because I was tired. I didn't correct him because the press had been outside the main entrance for 2 days, and I was looking for one night without a photograph taken of me alone. And I didn't correct him because, and I want to be honest about this, something about the way the mistake had happened felt less terrible than the truth of what my evenings had looked like for a while." She looked at the room, at the cameras, at Lena Park, whose pen had stopped moving. "The man's name is Darius Cole," she said. "He is an architect. He has built 7 buildings in 4 cities, all of them with his name deliberately removed from the public record. Not because he failed, but because he won a lawsuit proving his name had been stolen from one, and then chose to walk away from an industry that had tried to erase him, rather than fight for a seat at a table he no longer wanted to sit at." A hand went up immediately. She continued as if she hadn't seen it. I am not going to stand here and perform a clarification about my personal life to satisfy a narrative that was constructed by someone with a specific investment in making this story look like a liability. She did look at the hand now. What else would you like to know? The communications director later described what followed as the worst and best 25 minutes I have witnessed in 15 years of this job. Lena Park did not ask about the relationship. She asked about the Meridian Center. Lena's full piece, published at 6 p.m. She had worked for 19 hours straight. The story she published was 3,400 words. It had 6 sources. 3 of them were architects who had worked with Darius Cole and had never spoken publicly before. The headline was, "The architect who built skylines no one was allowed to credit him for, and the CEO who met him in the rain." The piece began with the Meridian Center, 44 stories. Glass and Indiana limestone, a building that had won 4 awards in its first 2 years and had been cited in architectural journals across 3 countries as a landmark of contemporary design. The lead designer's name had not appeared in any of those citations for 2 years, because a white senior partner at the firm where Darius Cole worked had allowed his own name to lead every submission, every press release, every award application. Gerald Shaw was quoted at length. "Darius Cole is the most gifted designer I have worked alongside in 40 years. The industry tried to erase his name from the most significant building of his generation. He fought back through proper legal channels, won completely, and then walked away not because he was beaten, but because he refused to keep doing business with people who had shown him exactly who they were. I have always thought that was an act of extraordinary integrity. I have waited for someone to write about it for 9 years." The piece then described the 7 subsequent buildings. No photographs of Darius. No direct quotes, he had not returned Lena's calls. Just the work. Described in detail through the eyes of people who knew what they were looking at. Then, it described Adrian's press conference. Word for word in significant portions because what she had said was the kind of statement that resisted paraphrase. And then in the final section, Lena wrote something that would be quoted by 17 other outlets by midnight. What Celeste Hargrove fed this journalist was a story about a man who couldn't be verified. What this journalist found instead was a man who had chosen not to be, for reasons that, once understood, say more about the industry that drove him to that choice than about the choice itself. The question this story leaves is not who Darius Cole is. It is why it took this long for anyone to ask. The story had 4.3 million views by 9 p.m. The comments divided, as they always do, into people who had always known this kind of thing happened and people who were surprised. The people who had always known outnumbered the people who were surprised by a significant margin. Celeste Hargrove's name appeared in the story once, in a single paragraph. Lena had not named her as a source. She had simply described board-level concerns raised through informal channels and noted that those concerns appeared to be based on information that was, in retrospect, incomplete. The paragraph was enough. Francis Aldridge read the story at 7 p.m. and called Petra Voss. Petra Voss had already read it. Francis said, "Did she come to you with this?" Petra said, "She texted me a link to the photograph with 3 words. Francis said, "Which words?" Petra said, "Worth discussing privately." There was a silence. Francis said, "I'll call an emergency board session for tomorrow morning." Petra said, "Yes, I think that's right." Across town in his apartment, Darius read the story twice. He was sitting in the parking lot of Zoe's school waiting for the dismissal bell, surrounded by other parents who were also on their phones. He called Kwame. Kwame had already read it 4 times. "Gerald Shaw," Darius said. "He's been wanting to say that for 9 years," Kwame said. "Don't be surprised that he did." Darius looked at the school doors. She put her name on something she didn't have to. He was not talking about Lena Park. "Yes," Kwame said. "She did." The school doors opened. Zoe came out in a rush of noise and movement, backpack enormous relative to her small body, looking for him in the pickup line with the specific scanning expression of a 9-year-old who expects her father to be exactly where he said he would be. She found him. Her face changed to the expression that he had spent 4 years since Marlene died quietly making himself worthy of. She climbed into the car. "Dad," she said before she had fully closed the door, "can we stop for burritos?" He said, "Yes." She said, "What's wrong?" He looked at her. "Nothing," he said. "Everything is actually fine." She looked at him for a moment with the particular assessment of a 9-year-old who knows when she is being given an incomplete answer, but has decided to accept it for now. "Okay," she said. "Burritos." He made dinner, put her to bed, read her one chapter of the book they had been working through together, a story about a girl who builds bridges, which Zoe had chosen herself from the school library, which he had noticed and said nothing about. He read the chapter carefully. She fell asleep before the end. He sat at the drafting table. The blueprints were open in front of him. He did not look at them. He looked at Zoe's bridges on the wall. Then he picked up his keys. He drove across the city. It was 10:47 p.m. The streets were the way they get late on weeknights in this city. Not empty, never empty, but thinned out. The specific quality of night that makes the city feel like it is breathing more slowly than it does in the day. He parked, walked in through the lobby. The night staff recognized him. Nobody said anything. He walked to the elevator. He knocked on the suite door. The pause before she answered was long enough that he wondered for a moment if she had already fallen asleep. He was about to step back when the door opened. Adrian was still dressed from the press conference, the dark blazer, her hair still down. No shoes. She was holding her phone screen dark. She had put it down when she heard the knock. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He was holding the canvas bag. He had not unpacked it at home. He had set it by the door when he arrived at his apartment and had not moved it. He had known, somewhere below the level of deliberate decision-making, that he was going to end up here. He did not say, "I saw the story." He did not say, "You didn't have to do that." He did not say, "I wasn't sure I was going to come back." She already knew all of these things. She stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around him without saying a word, her face against his shoulder. Her arms around him in the specific way of a person who has been holding themselves very carefully together for a long time, and has just found somewhere it is safe to put the weight down. He held her there, in the doorway of a hotel suite that had been prepared for a love story that two strangers accidentally stepped into, under the warm light of a corridor lined with white orchids. With the canvas bag still over his shoulder, and both of them slightly ridiculous, and both of them entirely certain. Down the hallway, a hotel employee, young on his way to the service stairs, passed the open doorway. He paused for a single second, took in the scene. He smiled. He kept walking. He would tell the story later to the front desk staff, to Owen, who had started the whole thing with 6 cheerful words. He would say, "I saw them in the doorway. They looked exactly like what I thought they were from the beginning." He would not be wrong. Darius and Adrian stood in that doorway for longer than was strictly necessary. Then she pulled back, looked up at him. "You read the story," she said. "Yes." "You didn't call me?" "No." "Why not?" He set the canvas bag down, just inside the door. "Because I needed to put Zoe to bed first, and because some things need to be said in person." She looked at the bag on the floor, then at him. "What things?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the deflecting quiet, the thinking quiet, the real one, the one she had learned to recognize in 5 days of living adjacent to this man. "I've been hiding," he said. "Not just from the press, from everything. I told myself it was a philosophy, that I'd decided on purpose, that I had good reasons." He looked at the bag. "I did have good reasons. The reasons were real." He looked at her. "But I think I kept using the reasons after they'd stopped being enough to justify what I was doing." She didn't say anything. She let him finish. "I have a daughter who draws bridges on the wall next to my blueprints," he said. "And my blueprints have no names on them. She has been watching that her whole life." He paused. "I don't want her to think that's the only way." Adrian was quiet. Then she said, "What does she draw the bridges between?" He almost smiled. She hasn't decided yet. She says she'll figure it out when she gets there. Adrian looked at him. Smart kid, she said. She is, he said. She is a very smart kid. The city hummed below the windows. The suite was warm. The orchids in the corridor had been freshened. Someone on the night staff did that at some hour Darius didn't know. She said, "What happens now?" He said, "I have no idea." She said, "That's the most honest thing you've said." He said, "I know. I'm working on it." She picked up the canvas bag and set it inside the suite, past the doorway where it belonged. She did not make a performance of this. She just moved it to where it should be. He looked at it. Then he came inside. The door closed. Somewhere down the hallway, the hotel employee who had paused for a single second was telling Owen at the front desk what he had seen. Owen smiled. He had always known. The emergency board session was called for 9 a.m. Not the meeting Celeste had orchestrated. A different kind of meeting, the kind that has a different weight, the weight of people who have read something they cannot unread, and are now required to account for their own part in the situation. Petra Voss arrived first. She had sent Adrian a message at 7 a.m., brief direct the way. Petra handled everything. "I owe you an apology. I should have asked more questions before accepting certain framing." Francis Aldridge arrived second. He had not slept well. It showed. Celeste arrived precisely on time. She had her materials, her talking points, the specific composed expression of a woman who has walked into difficult rooms for 22 years and has learned that composure held long enough can sometimes substitute for justification. The room was 7 board members, Adrian at the head of the table, Celeste to one side. Francis opened. He did not begin with pleasantries. He said, "I want to understand the sequence of events from Tuesday night through yesterday afternoon, specifically the communications that were made to journalists and to members of this board regarding Mr. Cole." Celeste said, "I shared certain concerns through appropriate channels based on what appeared to be significant gaps in the verifiable background of an individual who had become associated with this company's CEO." Francis said, "Through appropriate channels. One of those channels was Lena Park." "I provided context," Celeste said. "Background. I did not direct her coverage." "The framing she received," Francis said, "characterized Mr. Cole as an individual whose background was, in your words, impossible to verify through standard channels. Is that accurate?" Celeste said, "That characterization was accurate at the time." Francis said, "It was accurate because you looked through a narrow window. When Lena Park opened the window further, she found a man who had won a landmark legal case establishing credit for one of the most recognized architectural achievements of the past decade." "I was not aware of that case," Celeste said. There was a particular silence in the room, not the silence of people who believed her, the silence of people who were deciding whether to say so. Petra Voss said, "You characterized an individual as a liability based on an incomplete investigation conducted over less than 12 hours, and then communicated that characterization to a journalist and to 2 members of this board. And you were not aware of information that would have been discoverable in a straightforward legal database search." Celeste looked at Petra. Something shifted in her expression, just slightly. The first crack in the composure. "I acted in the best interests of this company," she said. Adrian, who had not spoken yet, said, "Did you?" The question was quiet. It was not hostile. It was the kind of question that is more devastating for being genuine rather than rhetorical. Celeste looked at her. Adrian did not look away. "I've been on this board for 11 years, Celeste said. "I know," Adrian said. "And in 11 years I have valued your perspective and your expertise significantly. That is not what this conversation is about." She paused. "This conversation is about whether the framing you applied to Darius Cole was based on the kind of incomplete, appearance-driven assumption that this company has spent 15 years trying to move beyond, and whether in sharing that framing before it was verified, you exposed this company and an individual to significant harm." The room was very still. Celeste did not answer immediately. She was too good at this to say something that could be directly held against her. She said, I think a formal review of my conduct would be appropriate, and I welcome it. Which was, of course, the answer of a person who believed that a formal review handled correctly would be survivable. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The formal review took 4 days, not because it was complicated, because these things move at the speed at which institutions are willing to hold themselves accountable, and that speed is rarely fast. What the review found was a pattern, not just the Darius Cole situation, a pattern built into the structure of how Celeste Hargrove had operated as an advisor for 11 years, a pattern of working informal channels, journalists, junior board members, communications staff, with characterizations and framings that were always technically deniable, but consistently directional, always pointing toward the same set of conclusions about the same categories of people. 3 former employees came forward during the review period, not because they were solicited, because the Lena Park article had created a space, the specific kind of space that opens when one person tells the truth publicly and other people suddenly understand that their experience is worth naming. One of them, a woman named Desiree, who had worked in Walsh Properties' communications department for 3 years and left 18 months ago, said that Celeste had told her directly, "The board responds better to certain kinds of faces at the top. That's not opinion, that's reading the room." Desiree had not reported this at the time because she had not believed it would go anywhere. The second account was from a former associate at Hargrove and Vane. The third was from a consultant who had worked on the Walsh Properties shareholder communications for 2 years. All 3 accounts described the same thing, in different situations and different words. A woman who had built her authority partly on the willingness to steer quietly decisions about who deserved to be visible and who didn't, who addressed this up in the language of strategy and optics and board responsibility, who had never once in 22 years been called on it directly, until now. Celeste's attorney issued a statement on the 4th day of the review. It was measured. It was 214 words. It said that Celeste stood by her record of service to the companies she had advised, that she believed the review had been shaped by incomplete context, and that she was resigning from the Walsh Properties Board effective immediately in the interest of allowing the company to move forward without distraction. It contained 0 apologies. The statement was published on a Thursday afternoon. By Thursday evening, 2 of Hargrove and Vane's institutional clients had made calls to the firm's other partners, asking questions that those partners could not answer in ways that were satisfying. By the following Monday, Celeste Hargrove had announced a leave of absence from active advisory work, pending a review at her own firm. The review at her own firm was led by partners who had watched Celeste operate for 15 years, and had their own catalog of moments they had chosen not to examine too closely. They were examining them now. Celeste did not fight this. She was too experienced to fight in a situation where the documentation was unfavorable. She simply went quiet, the specific, deliberate quiet of someone who had decided that the best available move was to wait and see what the next chapter looked like. She had spent 22 years being very good at the next chapter. The industry she moved in had a long memory for power and a short memory for accountability. She may have been right about what the next chapter looked like, but the chapter she was closing was the chapter in which nobody had ever made her say directly what she had always done, and that chapter at least was closed. Adrian Walsh's statement was released the same day Celeste's resignation was announced. It was 9 sentences. It thanked the board for the review. It noted that the company was committed to creating an environment where the information used to make decisions about individuals was complete, verified, and free of assumptions built on appearance alone. It said that this was not a new commitment but a renewed one, and it said that it would be backed by specific structural changes to the board's advisory process. It did not mention Celeste by name. It didn't need to. 2 weeks later, Darius was at his drafting table at midnight. The apartment was quiet. Zoe asleep in the next room. The blueprints open in front of him, but he was not looking at them. He was looking at the wall. At the buildings sketched and mapped and measured in the compressed handwriting that was his own private language. At the bridges beside them, confident, large, unafraid. He had received in the 2 weeks since the Lena Park story broke 11 messages. 4 from architecture firms, 2 international, 2 domestic, 2 from development companies, 1 from an international design council, 1 from a university architecture department asking if he would consider a visiting appointment, 3 from journalists, none of them Lena Park. He had not responded to any of them. Not because he had decided against responding, because he had not yet decided anything. He called Gerald Shaw at 12:15 a.m., which he would not normally have done, but Gerald had left his number on the second day with a note that said, "Call any time, I mean it." And Gerald answered on the second ring like a man who kept late hours. "I've been waiting for this call," Gerald said. "I figured," Darius said. They talked for 41 minutes, about the Meridian Center, about what it had meant to both of them differently from different positions in the situation, about the 9 years that followed, about the 7 buildings that nobody outside industry circles had known about until Lena Park published their names in a 3,400-word piece that was still being shared. Gerald said, "What are you going to do now?" Darius said, "I don't know." Gerald said, "That's the first honest answer you've given in 8 years." Darius almost laughed. Gerald said, "You know what the worst thing was? When they took your name off the Meridian Center, you know what the industry lost? Not just credit for a building. It lost the signal that a man who looked like you had built something that magnificent. There are architects out there, young ones, some of them barely started, who needed to see that signal, and they didn't get it for 2 years. And some of them decided in those 2 years that the room was not for them." Darius was quiet. Gerald said, "You won. And then you went dark, and I understand why. God, I understand why. But going dark was a second erasure. Kinder, more self-protective, completely understandable, and still a second erasure." He had never heard it put that way. He sat with it for a while. They said goodnight. Darius hung up and looked at the wall again, at Zoe's bridges. She had asked him once why he didn't have his name on his buildings the way some architects did. She had seen a building near her school with the architect's name on a small bronze plaque near the entrance. She had asked, "Why don't you have one of those?" He had said, "It's complicated." She had said, "Is it good complicated or bad complicated?" He had said, "I'm not sure yet." She had looked at him in the way she sometimes did, with the specific patience of a child who is waiting for the adult in the room to figure something out, and said, "You should figure it out." She had said this at age 8. He had been thinking about it since. He made a decision. Not a grand one, not an announcement, not a press release or a reversal or a public statement about reclaiming his identity. A single, quiet, permanent decision. He would allow 3 completed projects to be publicly credited under his own name. 3 buildings that had been finished in the past 4 years that had been attributed in press materials to his clients or to unnamed independent contractors that carried, if you knew what to look for, the specific fingerprints of a person who understood how light and structure and human proportion needed to work together. His name, on the record, public. Not because he wanted recognition, because Gerald was right, because Zoe was right, because the signal mattered, because somewhere there was a young architect who needed to see it, and the cost of keeping it hidden had stopped making sense. He told Adrian this when he saw her the next day, over coffee in the east-facing kitchen of his apartment in the morning light that came in at the angle he had planned. She looked at him for a moment. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "Finally." She didn't say anything that suggested she had been waiting for him to arrive at this. She just nodded, as if it was the only outcome that made sense and always had been. Walsh Properties announced the headquarters project 4 months later. The announcement was careful, specific, and deliberately understated, which was how Adrian handled things that mattered. A new flagship building, 62 stories, designed to anchor the city's skyline in her communications director's careful phrasing for the next generation of the company's growth. Budget, $620 million. Projected timeline, 4 years. Adrian had recused herself from the selection process formally in writing with documentation filed with the board's governance committee. This was not modesty. It was the specific kind of transparency that allowed no one to later argue the outcome. The selection committee was 5 people, 3 architects, 1 urban planning expert, 1 structural engineer, all chosen by the board's independent operations chair. The shortlist they produced had 6 names. 1 name appeared on every version of the shortlist, regardless of which committee member had drafted it. They voted unanimously. Darius accepted. He sat across from Adrian at her conference table, the formal table in the formal setting, which they both recognized as slightly absurd and necessary, and they discussed the terms. He had 1 condition. "I build it my way," he said. "No ceremonial groundbreakings, no press releases during construction. The work announces itself when it's done." She said, "Agreed." He said, "And I want access to every structural decision point in real time. No intermediaries." She said, "You'll have a direct line to Renata, who has a direct line to me." He said, "That works." She said, "Is that everything?" He thought for a moment. "I want the lobby to have light that changes across the day. Morning, sharp from the east, afternoon, warm from the west. The way it felt in the suite." She looked at him. "I can't put that in the contract," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm just telling you what I'm going to build." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Build it." He shook her hand. Both of them were aware of the particular history of handshakes between them. She smiled. He almost did. Construction began 11 months after that meeting. Darius worked on the building the way he worked on everything, quietly, precisely, from the inside out. He spent the first 3 months on the foundation. Not because the foundation was difficult, but because everything else was built on what he put there, and he did not rush what everything else depended on. He visited the site 4 days a week, in the worn boots, with the canvas bag. The site foreman, a man named Terrell, who had worked with 3 different principal architects on major projects and had opinions about all of them, told his crew after the first week, "This one actually looks at the building, not the plans, the building." It was the highest compliment Terrell gave. Darius knew that the building was something specific, not just a commission, not just a 62-story structure in a city full of 62-story structures. It was the physical manifestation of something that had begun with a broken suitcase latch and 1 small umbrella and a hotel clerk who said 6 words. He designed the lobby to feel like the suite, larger than its square footage, light that changed across the day, morning coming in sharp, afternoon going warm, the quality that makes a person want to stay rather than pass through. He designed the upper floors to carry their height lightly, not the aggressive verticality of a building that wants to dominate, but the confident verticality of a structure that knows what it is and doesn't need to announce it. He designed a small bronze plaque for the entrance. He had never done this before. He specified the typeface himself. The plaque would carry the building's name and beneath it a single line, designed by Darius Cole. He told no one he had specified this until Terrell noticed it in the blueprints and asked. Darius said, "It's time." Terrell looked at the blueprints for a moment, then at the building taking shape around them. "Yeah," he said, "it is." The building was finished on a Thursday in November. It took 4 years and 2 months. It came in on budget, which Adrian's CFO called unprecedented for a project of this scope. It came in with 0 structural failures during construction, which Terrell called the direct result of a principal architect who actually showed up. The critics saw it first. A writer from a major architecture journal spent 3 full days in the building before publishing her review. She came in at 7 a.m. on the first day and did not leave until 6 p.m. She came back the following morning and did the same. On the 3rd day, she arrived at noon and stayed until dark. What she wrote was not what most architectural criticism sounds like. She wrote about the lobby first, about the way the light came in at 8:15 a.m. sharp, almost horizontal, the specific quality of November morning light in this city hitting the east-facing glass and traveling the length of the lobby floor in a band that moved and narrowed as the morning progressed. About how by 2 p.m. the quality of the light had shifted entirely, warmer, more diffuse, coming in from a different angle entirely as the afternoon sun caught the reflective glass of the adjacent tower and bent into the lobby from above. She wrote, "This lobby feels different at 10 a.m. than it does at 4 p.m. That is not an accident. That is a building built by someone who understands that the people who live inside a structure live inside it across time, across seasons, across moods. This lobby was designed for the person who works late, for the person who arrives early, for the person who has walked through 1,000 corporate lobbies and felt in all of them like the building was built for something else. This one was built for them." The review ran under the headline, "The most human building built this decade, and you almost never knew who built it." 4 other major outlets published reviews in the same week. 3 of them cited the light. Darius read each review once. He did not share them. He did not respond to the journalist who reached out for comment. He filed them, the reviews, the photographs, the mentions in the same folder where he kept the Meridian Center case documents. The record. The thing that happened in the order it happened. The grand opening gala was on a Friday evening, 600 guests, the same kind of crowd as the one where this story had begun. Adrian stood at the entrance in a deep emerald gown, the same deep emerald which was either a coincidence or not, and watched guests pour into the atrium beneath the soaring glass ceiling that caught the evening light and distributed it across the lobby floor in the way Darius had described to her, in a quiet corner of a public library 8 months into the project, on an afternoon when they had briefly escaped the city. The bronze plaque was beside the entrance, designed by Darius Cole, in the typeface he had specified. Adrian had seen it for the first time 3 weeks before the opening. She had stood in front of it for a long time. She had not said anything. She had taken his hand. He had let her. Zoe was at the gala. She was 13 now. She had grown 3 inches in 4 years, and had in the past year begun to take an interest in technical drawing that her art teacher described as uncanny. She wore a dress she had chosen herself, dark green, which Darius suspected was not a coincidence. She sat in row 3 near the front and looked at the building the way she looked at everything, with the patient, comprehensive attention of someone who is building a catalog. Her father's name was on the program, on the building, in the lobby placard, in 6 review articles she had read without being told to. She had not said much about any of this. She was 13. She was not given to grand emotional announcements. But earlier that evening, before they left the apartment, she had gone to the wall where her bridges and his blueprints lived side by side, and she had looked at them for a moment. Then she had turned around and said, "Your name is on the building." He had said, "Yes." She had said, "Good." Then she had put on her coat. He had stood in the middle of the apartment for a moment alone, looking at the wall. Good. He was still thinking about that word when Adrian found him at the edge of the atrium, slightly separate from the crowd watching the lobby fill with guests and light. She stood beside him, not touching, just beside him. "How does it feel?" she asked. He looked at the building around them. "Like it was always going to be here," he said. "I just had to catch up to it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's good," she said. "Is it?" "It means it's right," she said. When a thing feels inevitable, it means it was built on the right foundation. He looked at her. She was looking at the building, at the light moving across the lobby floor, at the 600 people moving through a space that had been designed specifically with them in mind. "Both things," he said. She turned to look at him. "Both things," he said again, quietly. She understood what he meant. She looked at the building, at the lobby, at the light. "Yes," she said. "Both things." Lena Park was there. Press credentials, notebook already open. The specific alertness of a journalist who had published the story that started all of this and was watching where it had ended up. She had covered Walsh Properties for nearly a decade. She had written about earnings and acquisitions and leadership transitions and strategic pivots. She had never written anything that got 4.3 million views in the first 12 hours. She had also never written anything she was more certain was true. She found Adrian and Darius during the reception hour champagne, the low sound of a string quartet somewhere above the crowd. the specific acoustic quality of a lobby that had been designed to distribute sound as carefully as it distributed light. She approached with the knowing smile of a person who has earned the right to ask a direct question. "There was quite a story about a year ago," she said, notebook open, pen ready, looking between them both. "The whole city thought you were already married. A hotel mix-up, a photograph on the waterfront. Nobody ever got a clean answer to exactly what was happening." She paused. "Care to set the record straight?" Finally. Adrian looked at Darius. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Adrian said, "They weren't wrong, exactly." Lena's pen moved. "They were only," Adrian said, "a little early." She reached over and laced her fingers through Darius's hand. She lifted it just slightly, not dramatically, not for performance, but so that the small cluster of people nearby could see clearly. On her finger, catching the light from the glass ceiling above them, the light that changed across the day, the light that had been designed to reach this exact point at this exact time in the evening, sat a simple ring. Not expensive, not showy, the kind of ring that speaks of a decision made carefully and for the right reasons. The kind that says, "This is not performance. This is the truth." Darius had brought it to her not at a restaurant, not at an event, not with an audience. He had brought it to her on a Tuesday evening, a Tuesday because that was where they had started, in the kitchen of his apartment, in the east-facing morning light, while she was drinking coffee and reading something on her tablet. He had set it on the table beside her cup. She had looked at it. He had said, "I'm not going to make a speech." She had said, "Good, I don't need one." She had picked it up. She had said, "Yes." That was all. Now, in the lobby of the building he had built for her company in front of 600 people and one reporter with an open notebook, she held up the ring and said, "Now nobody's mistaken about anything at all." The crowd near them reacted a warmth, an eruption of something genuine, glasses lifting the specific shared joy of a crowd that has just been let in on something. Darius leaned his forehead against hers. Just for a moment. Both of them entirely unbothered by the cameras. Both of them, for what felt at last like all the right reasons, completely present, completely still. Together in the lobby of a building whose light changed across the day, whose foundation had been built carefully and from the inside out, whose name was on the plaque by the door. Both names, now. Lena Park closed her notebook. She already had everything she needed. She would publish the follow-up story the next morning. It would be shorter than the first, simpler. It would end with one sentence. What began as an accidental fiction between two strangers in the rain turned out to be the most accurate thing either of them ever lived. It would get 2.1 million views. Neither of them would read it. They were already somewhere else. Darius Cole walked into a hotel lobby one rainy Tuesday night with $38 in his wallet, a worn jacket, and a canvas bag carrying a notebook full of buildings no one was supposed to know he had built. He walked out of the other side of that night and the nights that followed, as the man whose name is on the skyline of the city he never left. As the man whose daughter now draws bridges on the wall beside blueprints that bear his name. As the man who learned later than he should have, and at greater cost than was fair, that hiding what you have built is not the same as protecting it. The industry that tried to erase him once did not break him. It just made him quieter. And quiet men, it turns out, build the loudest things. Ask yourself this honestly. If you had seen Darius that Tuesday night, boots worn, hands roughened, bag over one shoulder, would you have seen an architect? Or would you have seen what Celeste Hargrove saw? Because the difference between those two answers is not a small thing. It is the distance between the world we have and the world we keep saying we want. Every person who has ever been reduced to their appearance before they were given the chance to show what they carry, every Darius Cole who built something magnificent that someone else tried to put their name on, that person exists in the space between those two answers. And what happens in that space is a choice. Yours, not theirs. What this story taught me as someone who sits down to write these things, who looks for the truth inside the fiction, is simple. The most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to explain themselves to someone who has already decided who they are. Darius never argued with Celeste Hargrove. He never raised his voice. He never made his case to a room that wasn't ready to hear it. He just kept building. And eventually the building spoke for him. That is the kind of quiet I want to carry. Not the quiet of hiding, the quiet of someone who knows that the work is the point. That what you put into the world outlasts every conversation anyone ever had about whether you deserve to. Build the thing. Put your name on it. Let it speak. She opened the door. He was standing there with the canvas bag still over his shoulder, and the city behind him, and neither of them said a word for a long moment. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, right now, stay with us. Hit subscribe and follow our channel. Because what happens to Celeste Hargrove and what Darius finally decides to build next, that is the part that will change how you see everything that came before it. Don't go anywhere. If this story moved you, if you have ever been the person in the worn jacket in the wrong room, or if you have ever been the person who almost walked past someone like that without looking twice, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me, when was the last time someone decided who you were before you showed them what you could do? Like this video, subscribe to our channel. We tell stories like this every week. And remember, the building is the point, not who they think built it. I wrote this story because I needed to understand something. I needed to understand what it costs a person to choose invisibility as protection, and what it costs them to finally choose the light. I've spent time hiding things I made, worrying they weren't enough, worrying that naming them would invite scrutiny I couldn't survive. Darius Cole is not me, but the fear he carried is one I recognized. What I learned writing this is that the fear is not the problem. The fear makes sense. The problem is when the fear outlives its usefulness. When you keep the lights off in a room that was supposed to be for other people too, put your name on the work. It was always yours. This story was written with the support of artificial intelligence tools, and the audio narration is AI generated. All video footage and images used in the production of this video are stock material. Any resemblance to real events, real individuals, real names, or real locations is purely coincidental and entirely unintentional.